All right, Jason, we've got Sheila Gregoire on. She wrote a book called The Great Sex Rescue.
Yes, and she is brilliant and able to talk about anything.
You will hear the word orgasm
yes.
on this podcast
Yes.
more than you've heard it
possibly
in your lifetime.
Maybe more than I've said it out loud.
But all of it with a view towards recovering what God intended.
Yeah.
Not just where sex is concerned, but with intimacy, with marriage, with our relationship with the Father.
What I love about her and a lot of this conversation focused there was that when there's a transactional nature to our relationship with God, it's not surprising that becomes how we connect with everyone, including our spouse, and how we view sex and that relationship.
Yeah.
So we very much are diving into the nature of relationship, the nature of trust, the nature of intimacy. And then she gets very specific. She did a study it's the largest Christian study. 20,000 women were
surveyed,
and a lot of questions, a lot of it about what's taking place right in the bedroom.
Well, and exposing a lot of evangelical teaching that has really a warped view of sex as the way God intended, and dismantling the husband has to be obeyed principle, which we've all heard.
Right.
Sheila's so practical.
Yes.
And so I feel like she just looks for that fruit, and if there's no fruit, let's find out what will be fruitful.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive that she did in this survey and in this data and this research. So everything she's talking about is backed up by facts, including just dismantling some of the misinterpretations and assumptions that we've made where the Bible's concerned in how relationships, how marriage, how intimacy should look like in the kingdom.
Yeah, and we even get at the end, we actually get to those that are single, those that walk through divorce, your children who are growing up. She's got a lot of resources and a lot of wisdom in all those areas.
Yeah, and she's a Canadian.
She's a Canadian.
So I was outnumbered on this podcast.
Yes,
2-1.
I don't know if she said a or about, or sorry, but it was fun talking with her for sure. She's incredible. Great to have you here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got your book.
Awesome.
Just so you know, my wife and I have read this, and we are huge fans. She's a little jealous of me today for doing this podcast, and that she doesn't get to hang out with you. But thank you so much for writing this book. I mean, this Great Sex Rescue book, the level of research that went into this book is off the charts. I mean, you did a huge survey. Mm-hmm. All of it's based on data. It's so well sourced. I just have to tell you that I love everything about this book. I've been following you on Twitter. I love everything about you on Twitter, and we may get into that. We may not. We'll see. My wife, before I left the house, she actually said, "Tell her that I like the way that she's like Beth Moore. She stands up for herself, but she's still kind and respectful in the process." And I thought that's really cool.
That's a high compliment.
That is.
Yeah.
But this book, The Great Sex Rescue, the lies you've been taught and how to recover what God intended. I think in light of the title of our podcast, which is Rethinking God with Tacos, we'll get into that later. Mm-hmm. I think you have helped people rethink God in this area of intimacy, sexual pleasure, God's design for sex, and even helped people rethink the whole purity culture, coming to, I think, a place of wholeness that's really helping people rethink who God is, and consequently rethink what their sexual lives should look like. What has been the biggest thing that you're rethinking God in?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. One of the best compliments that I get from people is, I thought I had to leave the church because I was so disillusioned, but in reading your book, I found Jesus again.
That's awesome.
And this is a sex book.
Right.
It's not, but so much of intimacy really is the heart of God.
Yeah.
Right.
And the problem is we've taken sex and we've divorced it from real intimacy, and we've made it into duty and obligation and shame. And that's actually the same thing that many churches have made people's relationships with God into duty and obligation and shame.
Wow.
And so when you start to unpack how we approach sex in a negative way, you start to see the parallels with the way that we see God in a
Yeah.
negative way.
Yeah.
And it can actually help us find the beauty and intimacy again in all levels.
Yeah.
I was on the back porch with my wife this morning, and I had been prepping for this conversation, and so we were listening to one of your podcasts, another podcast, and talking through. And we've been married 25 years, and we were like, "Where was she 25 years ago?" And as we were processing through, but the conversation actually broke down to what you just said. The conversation that we were having was one about intimacy.
Mhm.
I'm a writer, and I write about. I've written several books, but they're all about one thing. They're all about the love of God, and they're all meant to bring you into deeper intimacy. And I told my wife, I said, she's basically revealing that what we believe about the nature of God impacts everything. And we have a statement that I say, you can't have intimacy with someone you don't trust.
Yeah.
And when I'm writing, I've applied that to the nature of God. And I saw what you're running at is this rethinking of God that has, if you can't trust God, you can't have intimacy with God. And just so in the context of relationship with your wife, if you can't navigate trust, then there is no intimacy. So I feel like what you're doing is practically bringing us back into understanding, but also introducing that the whole point of this thing is intimacy and trust. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And intimacy and mutuality, I think, can't really be divorced from each other.
Yeah.
And I think that the conversation around intimacy in marriage has largely ignored mutuality. And, the idea has been he needs to get his needs met. You need to meet his needs. And when you do that, you will feel close.
Yeah.
But it's then erased her needs. And God doesn't approach us that way.
Yeah.
God says you matter too. And in
Yeah.
order to have real intimacy, you have to have two people who both matter.
Yep. That's good.
And what too often the evangelical church has done is elevated one person's needs, specifically the husband's, over the wife's. And that's really
Right.
wrecked sex for everybody. And so we're trying to rescue it from that.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I was listening to a podcast that you were on, and just so you know, I'm a pastor. I pastor a church here in Charlotte, and in 18 years of pastoring, we've been through the love and respect. We've been through Gunger's material. We've been through Every Man's Battle. We've been through all the stuff. And you mentioned all of these by name. You mentioned a lot of the error that has been embedded and interwoven into the theology of those books and the concepts. And I'm looking back now. Of course, I'm the kind of pastor where it's like, yeah, you know what, big mistake. Sorry, let's not go that direction here. Let's go this direction. I'm on the journey with you. But when you came along and began to speak specifically to a lot of those certain things,
Yeah.
that were very male oriented in terms of being like the head of the household. I can't not tell you how many men feel so much pressure to be the quote head of the household when they're actually in practice already doing a mutual arrangement and relationship that's really healthy and beautiful, but they think they're doing it wrong.
Yes.
And you addressed that in this podcast. You said you wished pastors would preach what they practice instead of just trying to preach what they think they should, be preaching. And that's been the case in my life personally, and in a lot of the relationships that I see in our church. And that is that they practice the mutuality, they practice the agreement. For my wife and I, there's no tiebreaker decision maker. It's if we're not in agreement, we don't make the decision. It's a timing issue. So everything that's done is done in agreement. So would you speak into that a little bit about that myth that the man has to be this like tiebreaker decision maker and the pressure that puts on them?
Yeah, so think about how many people teach that. That is the teaching in the evangelical church, right? Like when you ask, if you were to ask people, what does it mean that a wife submits to the husband? Everybody would hem and haw, and finally they would come up with a definition that is something like when they can't come to an agreement, he makes the final decision.
Right. I've heard it.
So for her to submit means he makes the final decision, because that seems to be the only definition we can ever come up with. I don't think that's the proper definition, but anyway, that's a discussion for another time maybe. But but what we looked at was, we asked, okay, how many people believe that he should make the final decision? And a large proportion of evangelical Christians believe that. But then we said, okay, in your decision making, how does it actually work? And like, I think it was 78.9% of people make decisions together.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people believe he's supposed to make the final decision, but that's not what they do.
Right.
And if they do it, if they operate in such a way that he makes the final decision, even if he asks for her input first. So even if they talk about it, but then he makes the final decision,
Right.
your chance of divorce increases 7.4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, this wrecks marriages.
Yeah.
And what I find so interesting is, like, Emerson Eggerichs in Love and Respect, he said, one of the reasons marriages are breaking down left and right today is that we have two equals at the head, and you can't have that. You need the man to make the final decision.
Ugh.
And he makes this statement with no references to any studies. That he just states that like it's a truth, but he doesn't back it up with anything. And so what you were saying about our data, like, that's what we wanted to do with this book. Was we wanted to say, we're no longer just going to make statements like this is the way the world must be, because this is the way we've always talked about it. We're actually going to look at the data, because Christians are really bad at doing this. We don't like looking at data. We look at the Bible and we say, this is what I think the Bible says, and so this must be it.
Right.
And we said, no, Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit. A good tree can't bear bad fruit.
That's good.
And a bad tree can't bear good fruit. So if we look at the fruit of different teachings, you can see which ones are correct or not.
Yeah.
Based on like where the fruit is.
Yeah.
And so what I'm asking people to do is to re-examine our basic assumptions and actually go to the data. So we surveyed 20,000 women, largest survey that's ever been done in the Christian world, and we figured this out.
Incredible.
Yeah, and let me just put a plug in for your book right here, The Great Sex Rescue. I recommend everybody go and grab a copy of this. You will learn so much from this book and from the data that you've compiled. I mean, chapters like, bridging the orgasm gap. One of my faves. And you deal with porn as well, and the statement that the woman's supposed to be the methadone for the man. I mean, I remember hearing that. I literally remember hearing that growing up in the church and in that culture. And as a pastor dealing with people's daily lives in and out, the one thing that I found for sure was, like, none of that is working. Like, zero of those things are working for either party. And what I see in your book is like, hey, this is what is actually producing fruit. This is working to help bring intimacy back where it should be in this marriage relationship, and for mutual satisfaction, for mutual responsibility. I absolutely love it. I mean, my wife and I are huge fans, and we are now like saying, okay, will you please get some curriculum together? Can you get something that we could like roll into the church? Because that's, I think, a lot of pastors are looking for something that they can kind of like plug and play. And this is just so good.
Yeah, well, we've got a free 8-week video study with it, but I think it's probably mostly women that are going to be taking it. So we'll have to think about doing something for both men and women, because that would be, that's good. I really think, and I really believe that most guys, like the vast majority of Christian guys, are good guys. And yet the way that so many evangelical books talk about men, I think really puts men down. Like the idea that a man cannot be faithful to his wife unless she has sex every 72 hours and is really exciting and keeps herself attractive. Like the number of books that tell women you must keep yourself attractive or he's going to lust after other women. And these are the messages that really cause women's libidos to plummet, that cause her sexual satisfaction to plummet. But they also paint men as creatures who can never truly be redeemed by Jesus,
Mm.
who can never have the Holy Spirit transform them.
Yeah.
It's like men are only capable of getting so far, and then they need their wives to do the rest of it for them.
Mhm.
And men aren't like that.
Yeah.
Men are good. And
Are we?
I think you are, and I wish that we could have a more male positive message. One of the most fun parts of the research that we did, because I'll tell you, a lot of it was really, really depressing,
Mhm.
especially reading through the evangelical bestsellers and seeing how many of them had such terrible lines. Like Every Man's Battle literally said, like like you just quoted, when he quits porn cold turkey, be like a merciful vial of methadone for him. Like, I can't think of anything more dehumanizing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love and respect. Love and respect said, if your husband is typical, he has a need you don't have. So you need to minister to your husband sexually as unto Jesus Christ. So women don't have any sexual needs, Love and Respect said. So these are the kinds of things that are in our evangelical bestsellers. But then we did these focus groups with women after we did the survey, just to hear their stories. We asked for women whose marriages had really been transformed, who had at one point had terrible sex and now had great sex. And every single one of them told us about husbands who were amazing.
Mm.
Because what a lot of guys don't realize is that women are getting really bad messages that men aren't getting. And so when I tell men, your wife has been taught the obligation sex message, that she has to give you sex every 72 hours, or you will lust, watch porn, or have an affair, or God will be angry at her and she will lose God's acceptance and love. And they're like, no, she hasn't. Like, you're just making this up and you're just trying to bash on all these books. It's like, no, you don't know that, because women read the vast majority of books, 76% of nonfiction books are bought by women. And it's women who go to women's Bible studies where marriage books are read. So most men haven't read this stuff. They don't know what's in these books. And most guys, when they hear what their wives have been taught, are actually quite upset about it and want to help their wives overcome this. Because what we found, and this is one of the things we were thinking we'd find. So, and I'm kind of glad we did, but is that a lot of the reason that women have trouble reaching orgasm, that women have bad views of sex, that women just have trouble with sex in general, is not necessarily because of their husbands, but because of what they've been taught in church
Yeah.
and in Christian circles and in Christian resources. And so if we can just change that teaching, we can revitalize marriages.
You're defining sex. It's been defined improperly.
Mm-hmm.
We're 25 years in, my wife and I. I think we have one book back then.
Yeah.
The Joy of Sex. Was that it?
Yeah, that
Is
was
that a
yeah,
book?
yeah, that was a book.
I think we read that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm pretty sure it didn't answer all the questions.
Yeah.
So men are wanting intimacy just as women are wanting intimacy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we were created for. That's the whole point. And yet there's so many misunderstandings and so much transactional language and teaching around sex.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to talk about this from a self-control, intimate perspective, if you were to just give us, what is the definition?
Well, first of all, the question, what is sex? And this is the fundamental problem that we have, I think, when it comes to figuring out how to make sex good, is that we fundamentally misunderstand this. Because if I were to ask you, did you have sex last night? Which I'm not asking you, you do not have to answer. But but if I were to ask you, what you're thinking I'm asking is something along the lines of, did you put your penis into your wife's vagina, move around until you climaxed? Like, that tends to be our definition.
Right.
That's intercourse. And that certainly is a part of sex. But the problem with that definition is she could be lying there making a grocery list in her head. Like, she could be not present whatsoever. She could be lying there in emotional turmoil, or she could be lying there in physical pain, and it would still count as having sex. She could even be raped, and it would count as having sex.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
And yet, when you look at the Bible, that's not how, when God talks about sex in a positive way, that's not how he defines it.
Yeah.
Like in Genesis 4, verse 1, we read that strange verse, which we all laugh at as kids, and Adam knew his wife Eve, and they conceived a son. And we all think, oh, God's embarrassed of the real word. But if you look at that word to know, It's the same word that David uses in the Psalms when he says, search
Yeah.
me and know me, O
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
It's this
Mhm.
deep longing for
Yeah.
connection,
That's it. Yeah.
right? And so God is saying sex is more than physical. It's an intimate longing to know each other inside and out. So we know it's intimate. We know from Song of Solomon that it's pleasurable for both.
That's right.
You know, both people are having fun in Song of Songs.
Yeah.
And then we know in 1 Corinthians 7, that famous do not deprive passage, which is often weaponized against women. But when you
Mhm.
actually read it, you see that it is totally mutual.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the picture of sex we get from the Bible is intimate, pleasurable, and mutual.
So good.
That's so good.
It's not one-sided intercourse. But when we think that sex is one-sided intercourse, then what happens when a couple gets married? You know, so you have a Christian couple, they've waited, they've done it all right. They haven't had, you know, they haven't fooled around. They get married and now they're supposed to have sex. So they rush to intercourse and she feels basically nothing. But they figure, well, now we've done it. Like this is what we're supposed to
Right.
do.
Right.
And so they keep doing this. He thinks she's just not sexual. She thinks, I guess I'm broken. And this is the best I have to look forward to. And they
Right.
just keep doing this over and over again because they haven't properly been taught that it's more than that.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things we found that 47-point orgasm gap you were talking about, how,
Mhm.
you know, other studies have said that roughly 95% of men almost always or always reach orgasm in a sexual encounter, where only 48% of women do. So that's a 47-point orgasm gap.
Right.
And of the women who do reach orgasm, only 39% do so through intercourse.
Right.
So most women need something else. So if we're defining sex as only intercourse, that's one of the reasons we have a huge orgasm gap.
Yeah, huge. One of the statements that you make in your book is a series of statements, but sex should be personal. It should be pleasurable. It should be pure. It should be prioritized, pressure free, put the other first, and passionate. And you know, as I'm reading down that list, which I think put the other first is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is what Jesus has done for us. In fact, every one of those statements really could mirror what Jesus has done for us as well, and how he feels about us and his relationship with us. But that put the other first, I mean, that speaks directly to as a man loving my wife as Christ loves the church, and willing to not, you know, lay down my life, willing to put her first in priority in every single situation and relationship. In fact, I personally have found that is one of the secrets to satisfying my needs, is to satisfy her needs. And I think also as a man, I don't think any man wants to go around life thinking that, well, you know, I can't satisfy my wife, and so, you know, because you know, I only embrace intercourse as the one thing that we can do. Which I don't know how deep we want to get into that, but I'm willing to go as far as you want. But I don't think people feel in any way more manly because of that. In fact, I think they feel defeated, and they feel as if they're failures if they can't satisfy their wives.
I would hope so. I actually would push back on that a little bit, because I really think there's a strain in Christianity which thinks that women just aren't sexual. I mean, if you read Emerson Eggerichs, like his whole chapter on sex in Love and Respect does never ever mentions once that a woman can feel pleasure. There's nothing about a woman's pleasure, nothing about a woman's orgasm. In fact, he actually said to women, why would you deprive him of something that makes him so happy and takes such a short amount of time? And if you're trying to convince women to have sex, saying it takes no time really means you're not prioritizing their pleasure. So there's a bit of a problem there. But you know, with this putting each other first, let me tell you one of the stories that I found the saddest from the books that we read. And it was one by Tim Keller. And we looked at the best-selling Christian sex and marriage books, the 10 best-selling marriage books and the 6 iconic sex books. We created a rubric of 12 markers of healthy sexuality, and we judged each book on those 12 markers. And Tim Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage, it scored neutral. Like, it was actually one of the better scoring books, because most of the books scored as harmful. So it was one of the better scoring ones. It was in the middle. So it wasn't helpful. It wasn't harmful. It was just kind of there. But he had this one anecdote where he said early in their marriage, sex was a big source of tension. And he would say, sometimes we'd have sex, and when it was over, I would ask Kathy how it was. And if she said it just hurt, we would both be devastated. And so we learned not to go for her orgasm, because that was such a stressful thing, and instead just to concentrate on what we could give each other. And that the giving was the most important part. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay, so if you only found out that it hurt her after the fact, then you're not communicating during the fact. And if it's hurting her, she should speak up about that. But she obviously didn't feel free to. And, you know, we have 22% of women experience something called vaginismus, which is primary sexual pain. Christians have it at twice the rate of the general population. And we never talk about this. And so for him to say that line without explaining about vaginismus, I found difficult. But then he says, you know, we learn not to go for her orgasm and just concentrate on what we can give. But I'm wondering, what exactly is Tim Keller giving? Like, if she's not receiving orgasm, like, and that's the kind of advice which really works if she's orgasming, let's say 60% of the time, you know, and you just, some nights, you know, she's not going to, and you don't want the pressure. But imagine if you're a couple where she's never had an orgasm and you read that. Like, now it's like, well, if she wants an orgasm, she's being selfish, because she's supposed to be concentrating on what she can give, not on what she can get. And this is the problem with people writing sex books who are just pastors and who haven't done the research. And in the Christian church, the majority of our sex advice has been given by people who, quite frankly, don't know what they're talking about.
Wait, pastors aren't the ones that should be writing all the books? Is that what you're saying? That's awesome.
Like, you know, it's just one of those things that they're writing out of their own experience, and that may have been the right thing for them, but that's terrible advice for awful lot of people. And I don't think he even recognized it. You know?
And that's why we appreciate your book so much, because you have this broad range of people that are engaged in this conversation to help you arrive at what I believe ultimately is some amazing truths about how God views all of this. And it really is life-changing.
I first of all, thank you, for writing this. Thank you, Derek, for making this interview happen. Orgasm is said more times in this conversation than I am incredibly shy. I told Derek, I am one of the most shy. Like, half the conversation I had with my wife this morning was, I'm more nervous about this interview than I've had in the longest. But I also understand the importance of it. My dad gave me, this is the advice he gave me before I got married. And it was really good advice. And it's true. He said, if you do it right, you'll be having the best sex 25 years into marriage. And he was talking about if you'll lay your life down for your wife. And it was a little gross, because my dad was about 25 years into marriage. So he was letting me know something I didn't really want to know, but I also very much wanted to know, was that the bedroom was about sacrificial love. And it was about equality and
mutual satisfaction.
And so I knew that going in.
And your love is revival.
Hey guys, I'm interrupting this podcast for just a minute so I can invite you to partner with us by giving to A Family Story. A Family Story is a 501, a nonprofit, and it's our ministry. And it's what allows for me to produce this podcast and other regular content. We've been living this faith journey for a long time, but 2014 was when we officially stepped away from the traditional pastoring approach to full-time ministry. It's been fun. This journey's been wild. And this last year was no less faith-inducing, with COVID affecting travel and speaking. And it's been good, because hey, we started a podcast. Our passion is to create content catalytic for an encounter with the always good, transforming, reconciling love of our Heavenly Father. And so our heart through this ministry has always been that through speaking, writing, film, and music, we're relentlessly sharing the goodness of our Father, the good news. Your giving goes directly to support this podcast, as well as written content, discipleship content, teaching small group messages, articles that we release weekly, and also the book I'm writing. I'm excited about what I'm chasing down right now. We appreciate all the support, whether it's sharing, writing a review, following us, signing up for our email list, or financially. We just love being on the journey with you. If you want to give to A Family Story, you can go to afamilystory.org, afamilystory.org, and click on the Give button. All right, thanks, guys. Let's get back to the podcast. My wife told me when we were just about to get married and we were looking at our vows, she said we were looking for the best vows.
Yeah.
And I, as a young man, I was 21 when I got married, 21, 22 kids. And she said, by the way, I'm not going to say obey.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, well, that's strange. I say it. And she's like, no, you don't. The man doesn't say it. And I looked at it and I remember rereading it going, she's right. The man doesn't say obey. Well, what the heck? That makes no sense. And so that was the foundation for us. But for us, the practical learning, well, I'm grateful that you're so practical and so well spoken, and we're having an open conversation, because if there was an issue with or any hardship that my wife and I faced, it was that there was no information there.
Yeah.
There was nowhere to find it. And anything that I was reading that didn't have sacrificial love, we innately understood that it wasn't helpful to us. For me, the biggest thing is that you really run at the theme that I've loved and so appreciated as I've listened to the podcast and read the book is the obligation aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, when I look at the nature of God, I see sacrificial love. I see God looking for equality with humanity, looking for, and you find it through sacrificial love. And when you have equality, a husband for a bride, we're referred to as the bride. And intimacy then would be, this most intimate of moments in the bedroom. But I would love for you to speak to the nature of God, the nature of obligation in the psyche, not just in the physical side of things.
Yeah. So you've just said God uses sexual imagery to talk about his relationship with us, right? Like throughout the Bible, we see that. Song of Solomon is literally about sex, but it's also figuratively about God and us, right? His banner over me is love.
Yeah.
So there, Jesus does speak in sexual imagery about his relationship with us. And I think it's because in the sexual aspect, we understand most about what intimacy with God looks like. And God is a God who gives us free will, right? He doesn't force us to love him, because if he did, it wouldn't be real love.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the conundrum that God had from the very beginning, is that we need to have free will.
Yeah.
And
yes,
in Christian, in an evangelical, especially, advice to women regarding sex, it has not been a message of free will, but a message of obligation.
Yeah.
So let me tell you the story of Kay, because I think it really illustrates this well. So Kay and her husband really enjoyed sex when they first got married. Things were working great. She was regularly reaching orgasm. Everything was cool. Then she had her first child. Things still worked well. After her second, she had postpartum depression. And after her third, she had a very traumatic birth and postpartum depression. And it took her a while to recover. But once she was recovered, she started initiating sex every 72 hours like she was supposed to, because multiple books, Every Man's Battle, Power of a Praying Wife, Sheet Music, like multiple books and multiple women's conferences will all tell us the rule is 72. Okay, you have to have sex every 72 hours. So she starts initiating every 72 hours. And she is just not sexually responsive anymore. Like her body's not doing anything. And 3 years into this, she just is really resenting sex. She doesn't know where her sex drive has gone. She resents her husband because he's having all this fun while she's not. And she sits down with him and she says, I can't do this anymore. And they have a really open conversation about it for the first time.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't ever want you to do anything just because you feel like you have to. That's not what I want. I don't want duty sex. So from now on, even if we're in the middle of intercourse, if you're like, no, I'm done, I don't want this, I've changed my mind, he said, we are going to stop.
Yeah.
No matter what, we're going to stop, because you're never going to do something you don't want to do. And over the next few months, he proved that to her.
Mm.
that she wasn't obligated. And she said, I felt my sex drive return.
Yeah.
She slowly started to be able to orgasm again, and they settled into a whole new routine. They only initiated when somebody wanted to, and now they have sex every 72 hours. So it's still every 72 hours, but it's totally different because it's not because she has to, it's because she wants to.
Right.
And what we found in our survey is, I think there's this worry that if we don't coerce or bribe or threaten women into having sex, they're not going to have sex. And so we need to give them this obligation sex message. And it goes along with this idea that sex isn't for women, that there's no reason for women to want sex.
Right.
But what we found is that if you have really good marital satisfaction, if she is regularly reaching orgasm, and if she feels emotionally close to him during sex, the frequency totally takes care of itself.
Sure.
Like if those three things are happening, sex is not going to go for once a month. Okay. Like there's this myth that women just give up on sex for no reason. And what we found is that frequency is a marker of what's going on in the relationship.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so instead of talking about frequency, we need to be talking about marital satisfaction. Does she feel close during sex?
Yeah.
Because so many guys have trained themselves on porn, and so they depersonalize during
Yeah.
sex, and she feels very distant. And is she regularly reaching orgasm? Because if those things are happening, then sex is going to work. But if we're just giving her the obligation sex message, that is the worst message that she can have for her libido, her orgasm rates, her rates of sexual pain. It wrecks everything.
And you're having a conversation that is, you've just given us practical ways to build trust, because trust is the thing that ultimately, as you're saying, it all takes care of itself where there's trust, where trust continues to grow. And a lot of times what's missing is that aspect. Is that what you're saying? A lot of times, whatever the reasons, whether it's objectification or the sense of obligation, those are breakdowns in trust.
Yeah.
And without that, you really can't have access to intimacy.
Yeah. And a lot of women feel very objectified, especially in the church. When my daughter was 11, my youngest daughter, when she was 11, her Sunday school teacher told her, you can't wear V-necks anymore to church. You need to watch what you wear, because now that you're developing, men are going to look at your chest.
Yep.
I mean, we had a terrible time getting her to church for the next few weeks. She was so traumatized by that. That's a terrible thing to say to an 11-year-old girl.
Yep.
But if you talk to evangelical women, almost all of them have stories of what they were told when they were hitting puberty, about how they were now a stumbling block to men. Even elders, pastors, so many teenage girls who will tell you that pastors would comment on what they were wearing. And it's really traumatizing. And so you go into church and you feel like, my body is dangerous.
Yeah.
My body is dangerous, and all these men are looking at me and wanting to use me. And I honestly think that is a very shaming message that we're giving boys as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because we're basically telling boys that sexual attraction and lust are the same thing, and they are not. Like, you can notice a girl's attractive and not lust after her.
Yeah.
Right.
We're raising a whole generation of boys to feel guilty for normal biological reactions, and I know, like, people notice, like, you're human. Jesus did not say whoever sees a beautiful woman has committed lust. He says whoever looks with lust has committed adultery, right? So it's a deliberate action and a deliberate mindset. And so if you're 14 years old and you notice that a girl has a tight sweater on, that doesn't mean you've lusted after her. And I think that we need to free guys for that.
Well, and not only is it in a way giving them a pass, it's shifting the responsibility, personal responsibility, to the person that shouldn't bear it, to the woman, to the girl. It's like, this is not your responsibility. I have two daughters, and to have possibly raised them with a mindset that it's their responsibility to prevent guys from lusting, it would have been like absolutely destroying their identity, destroying their confidence. That burden is just way, way too much to bear, and I think it's illegal. And it's illegal to place a responsibility on someone based on someone else's problems and issues.
And it's unfair to the husband that they're about to marry, because now he's got to live under that thing they've had to navigate, while he's just like every other guy that I've been told, instead of creating some element of trust
Right.
Yeah, and
that
actually,
can be built. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I was going to say that's a really good point, because this one message that all men lust, it's every man's battle, that was the one message that we measured that hurt women, even if they were only taught it but never believed it.
Wow.
So if a girl is taught that in youth group, even if she never believed it herself, it lowers her trust of her future husband, even if she never believed it, because she's growing up in this environment
Right.
where that's the way everyone's acting.
Sure.
So even if she didn't believe it, that's what she's seeing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and they're taught, I mean, part of that 72 hours, is it 72 hours?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Every 3 days? Part of that
depends on if you can get the kids out of the house.
Part of that 72 hours is imagine the pressure that comes if you go into a marriage thinking a man can't control himself past 72 hours. Well, what does it say about your ability to trust the man after 72 hours? What does it say about his relationship with God and the fact that whether or not he has self-control? It's setting the whole thing up for a fail.
Yeah, and Kevin Lehman actually says in his book Sheet Music several times that during her period, she should give him oral sex or a hand job so that he doesn't watch pornography, because he needs it every 72 hours. And in the postpartum phase,
as though it's her responsibility.
Right. And in the postpartum phase, or if she has heavier periods, or if she's just not feeling well, she should give him a hand job if she doesn't feel intercourse. So, I mean, to tell a woman who's just, pushed out a baby that the main responsibility, what she really should be thinking about, is taking care of her husband's sexual needs. That's just distorted and really wrong.
Yeah.
And this message really damages women.
Sure does. And men.
Yeah.
Because what kind of man wants to believe he can't control himself past 72 hours? I mean, sometimes you feel something and you think, well, it must be true then. Everybody's saying it. And
that was my point earlier. Just like, I think it's demoralizing to a man to feel like, well, it has to be done out of obligation. Like, I wouldn't want that.
Sure,
like,
sure.
I think it mirrors even Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. It wasn't an obligation of obedience. It was the joy of restoring our relationship and bringing us into that adoption relationship. And so I think so much of this mirrors how people have a distorted view of God. They have a distorted view of Jesus because they have a distorted view of this sexuality, this sexual relationship. I mean, for someone if someone was only doing things out of obligation for you, well, because I have to, I mean, I'm like, well, I don't want that. Like, that's demoralizing.
Right.
And I think it's both sides as well. It's it just has been placed predominantly on the woman in our culture, our church culture. And Sheila, you're helping people break out of it. You are helping people rethink God, rethink how he views all of this, because it really has been subject to individual interpretations of certain scriptures and, all this. Yours is so steeped in reality, like, this works, this is healthy. And this feels good, and this is right. I mean, those are also markers for the kingdom of God and that fruitfulness you're talking about.
Because Jesus brings wholeness. Jesus brings completeness. When Jesus is present, there's love and there's joy and there's trust. There's all these good things. And so if that's not present in the marriage, even if you're doing all these things that all these books tell you to do, then we should start asking ourselves, is what I'm believing a distortion of God? And I really challenge, this is what our big challenge is to the evangelical church, is let's rethink all of this stuff. Because when we follow Jesus, our relationships should get richer, not poorer. And yet the way that we're talking about sex, especially for women, makes everything way poorer. And by extension, it makes men's sex poorer too, because men
Sure.
don't want duty sex either. Good
Sure.
men, at least. Good
Sure.
men.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So,
Yeah. Nobody wants to live in the context of obligation.
no.
Whether you're on the receiving or giving end, that's not actually relationship. That becomes a transactional interaction, and
Mhm.
it's actually contrary to intimacy. I pastored for a little while, and in that short period of time was a family pastor, and just in that short period of time had several interactions with couples who'd come in, and I was always astounded by, I've said this before on the podcast, they didn't know a lot of scripture, but they knew wives, submit to your husband, right? That scripture, but they didn't even understand the rest of that scripture. And I would always say, listen, let's take that and set that aside for a second. If husbands would love their wives like Christ loved the church, we wouldn't be even having this conversation, because a lot of times the question was sex, and but it was very transactional in nature. I would always come back to, listen, this isn't the goal. And I know it isn't the goal for you as a man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not hers either, but it's not even your goal. You want intimacy. That's what you want, union. You want trust, and it won't. You can't get there from here.
Yeah.
What would it look like if you knew how to be kind and patient and generous, and you navigated in self-control? What would that look like in your marriage?
Yeah, and it is amazing how much we talk about sex like it is a transaction. If he does housework, she'll get in the mood.
Right.
If he talks to her more, she'll give him sex. And it says to women, how can you expect him to talk to you if you don't meet his sexual needs? Like, you need his emotional affection,
Right.
and he needs your sexual affection. And telling that to a woman, oh, so he doesn't want to talk to me,
Right.
like he really is only interested in sex, like that's not a very nice thing. And the housework thing, so the only reason he'll do housework is to get sex. Well, he made the dishes dirty as well. Like, that's just kind of icky. And the whole thing is just icky.
Yeah, it is. It's gross.
It's almost like you give your kid an allowance for doing chores. I don't know. And that's just it's not the picture that Jesus gives us of intimacy. And I'm just hoping that we can change the conversation about sex in the evangelical world to get back to this, mutual, pleasurable, intimate. And I have a whole lot of other words in the book, but if you just remember those three, that kind of sums up everything. That it isn't anything that's forced. It isn't anything that's bribed or threatened or coerced. This is something which is about us truly knowing each other. And that's the beauty of it.
I love what you just shared, because I find, and it's just rethinking God, right? But in the context of the bedroom, if you have a transactional relationship with God, then it's going to filter down into very transactional relationships, whether it's in the nature of your relationship with your wife, or how you parent your kids, or how you do friendship, or how you lead in your workplace, or your understanding of authority. And when you begin to understand the nature of sacrificial love, that the picture of Jesus on a cross, that there's this equality, that he becomes fully human, that he becomes flesh and blood. There's this equality in nature, that everything he's looking for is relational, not transactional. That impacts every aspect of your life. And I don't know anybody who's married who doesn't want intimacy in the bedroom. I mean, that is a beautiful thing. That's the high watermark. It's the most intimate place in a marriage. So it's a really important place to begin to understand what trust looks like and what intimacy truly looks like. I'm so grateful you're writing this.
Yeah, and even in the subheading of your book, basically just this one statement of recover what God intended. And I really feel like that's what's happening right now. I think we're in an age of recovering what God truly intended. I mean, I have to believe that, because I'm super hopeful for the church. I'm super hopeful for, Jesus, like having his way. I think heaven on earth is a prayer that I want to strive to answer. So I try not to, I tend to not complain about the church a lot, but it's so hard not to have to point these certain things out. And the way that you do it in your book really is so gracious. You don't pull any punches in terms of pointing out issues that are wrong, but at the same time, I think it's gracious because you're bringing people into recovering what God intended and challenging those things. If we can't question, if God's above question and the only answer, for God is, whoever the latest, greatest, biggest ministry is that says, well, that's the interpretation of that, then man, we're in trouble. We're in big trouble.
Yeah.
God is open to questioning. His intimacy allows for us to come to him with hard thoughts, hard questions. And but I do believe we are in a season of really recovering what he intended, what he originally intended. And Jason and I both are just firm believers that Jesus is perfect theology. That, you know, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, and we've got to run through the filter of Jesus as the true identity for what it means to be human as well. So, and yet your book is doing a phenomenal job of that.
Well, that's so good to hear. And, you know, I want people to get that picture that God has this incredible design for us to live truly intimately in oneness. And if that's not a reality in people's lives, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're doing something, that you're terrible people. It just means you got some growing to do. And so don't settle for less. Like, like it doesn't mean you need to beat yourself up, but at the same time, don't miss out on something wonderful that God has for us. And so I hope that I can give people a vision of what God really did intend. Because I think if our sex life can truly reflect the relationship that God wants to have with us, it can be such an energizing force. It can be such a peace-giving force. It can be all kinds of wonderful things in our lives. And it hasn't been that for a lot of couples. And that's something to mourn. That's okay to mourn. But then let's make it a reality in our lives as much as we can now. And let's run after that and don't give up hope, even if you've been married for 26 years or 32 years or 17 years or however many years it is. Like, you know, we can still run after more intimacy, more of Jesus in every aspect of our marriage.
That's good. That's good. I know this is specifically for those that are married, but I know you have the ministry to love, honor, and vacuum. And I know you're running after more than just in the context of marriage. What's burning on your heart for those that are single, for those that are waiting, for those that are on the journey, maybe have stepped away from a marriage but are believing that God's going to restore and there's relationship in the future?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been trying to teach lately is that the church has made marriage into an idol. And our whole approach to marriage has been wrong, because our approach has been, let's keep marriages together. And it's a success if people don't get divorced. And no, it's a success when people look like Jesus.
That's good.
That's good. It's a success when we walk in his steps. It's a success when we achieve healing and wholeness. And some people achieve healing and wholeness through divorce. You know, if you're married to a narcissist, you know, we need to understand that God loves you more than he loves the institution of marriage.
That's good.
Just as the Sabbath was not, you know, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And in the same way, marriage was made for us, not us for marriage. And
that's so good.
You know, we were not created to get married. We were created for intimacy with God. And in marriage, we can experience that, but you can experience it as a single person too. And so I just hope that we can, again, just put Jesus back on the throne and be chasing after him no matter where we are in life, and not chase after an institution or an idea of what it is to be a man or a woman, because everything needs to come back to Jesus.
That is so good.
That there is so much freedom in that statement. Like what you just said encapsulates like so much freedom. Like I literally hear chains just busting off of people that are listening to this right now. That is so good. Yeah. Wow. Marriage as an idol. I had not considered that. And I know very true.
I part of why I ask is I know single people who are frustrated, and I could imagine them listening to this going, well, how do I navigate this? And to be able to say that the goal isn't marriage, the goal is intimacy with Jesus, and then trusting that and discovering him in that relationship. And then I know folks who are divorced. I also know I've been the person who is in a room going, I don't want to tell this person they should get a divorce, because everything in my Christian teaching has told me that is a failure, but she should leave this guy. Like totally needs to leave this guy. He's an abusive he's not a good
Yeah.
man, and he's not
Yeah.
changing. He's not
Yeah.
repenting, and realizing that that's the way into life, and having enough years on me at this
Yeah.
point to actually know enough about some of these stories to go, it was the way into life,
Yeah.
and into wholeness, into life, and into restoration, a new marriage,
Yeah.
and a new family. So
Yeah.
so powerful to be able to pull those chains off of people,
Yeah.
and remind them that it's about intimacy with Jesus. It's about union and oneness with God.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
And I mean, Sarah and I have, countless times discussed this amongst ourselves, but with other people. And a lot of times the answer is run, get away from that situation, like right now.
Yeah.
And that's healthy. I'm a widower. My first wife was killed by a drunk driver. We were only married a year, and she was 7 months pregnant at the time. But in that 1 year of marriage, I think I gained a lot of valuable information in terms of what not to do, who not to be. So I say all that to say I'm a firm believer in second chances, whether that is a divorce or whether that is, in my situation, a loss and a death.
Yeah.
But I kind of equate them almost to the same thing. And I've just seen so many second chances be really, really healthy because the person grew and learned through that first process. Even knowing what not to do is sometimes just as valuable. And then, to take the shame level off of it that the church tries to put on it, that I don't believe Jesus is putting on it. That's a huge step to see people be brought into restoration and freedom. And I think restoration can be better than original.
Yeah.
Only God can do that. He can restore something, not just back to normal, but better than original. He can do that with a life. He can do that with a marriage. And we trust God for that, for people. No, Sheila, are you a Canadian?
I am. Yeah. Did you hear it in my voice?
Oh yeah, she's Canadian.
So I'm outnumbered in this room.
Are you?
I'm Canadian too.
Jason's Canadian too.
Yeah, we were listening to you on the deck this morning. My wife said she's Canadian. I'm like, yeah, definitely.
So I'm totally outnumbered here, but I lived in Vancouver for 3 years. I was a landed immigrant, so I consider myself an honorary Canadian.
That's right.
So,
and if we were going to shift gears here, Canadians love tacos.
They do.
Oh yeah.
You know where we're going with this, Sheila, don't you? This is the most important part of the podcast.
Okay.
That's right.
Lay it on me.
Not really.
Do you have a taco story? We don't take ourselves so seriously, and we really love the idea of connecting around meals.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of fun. Just some quick questions. You got any tacos? You a taco person?
What kind of taco? What's your dream taco?
I am. You know what? Tacos. We've had tacos for Christmas dinner several times because I love. Well, it can actually be quite an elaborate meal, if you do all the fixings, and then people can have exactly what they want, and no one complains.
That's right. That's right.
And it's kind of all fun, but there's also not as much cleanup.
Yeah.
So I actually, it's my go-to meal for company. I just love it. But I do the whole thing. I do like the Chipotle, like cilantro rice thing, and the corn salsa thing. Like I do the whole thing. Yeah, the beans, like everything. Yeah.
Tacos for Christmas. That's a first.
That's the first one.
I'm gonna introduce that idea to my wife. See if that.
I had this vision of Elf creating a taco, and it had like spaghetti and maple syrup, and all the stuff in the tortilla itself. But your way is much better.
But like when you have to make 3 Christmas dinners, when you got all the extended family and you're always the one who hosts, sometimes you just don't want to do another turkey. And so for my immediate family, we do tacos.
I like
it. What about, is there any TV show, movie, anything like that you guys are loving right now?
Oh, this is terrible. Like my favorite, I just love, this is so depressing, but I love Special Victims Unit. Like I binge watch all the seasons. I think I've seen them. I love Mariska's the best, and she's given her life to educating about sexual abuse and assault. And so I know it's totally depressing, but somehow when I watch it, I just feel like justice will reign,
Yeah. So you watch them back to back. That would definitely, I'd be dreaming about it. Yeah, it wouldn't take me long.
Oh yeah.
What about
Yeah.
what are you reading? Is there anything either for fun or that's really impacting you right now or influencing you?
I've done there's been a bunch of books that have come out recently that have really impacted me. The trifecta, I'm often included in the trifecta. So Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumais.
We just had her on.
Yeah, The Making Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. So often my book, Great Sex Rescue, is with those three. Like Amazon will often recommend them together. So, but those two books are great, and I love Beth and Kristen. A Church Called Tove by Scott McKnight and Laura Berenger, really good too.
Oh my gosh.
So
Yeah,
I read a ton of N.T. Wright last summer. Like a lot of his books were on Kindle Unlimited, and I just started reading them all. And I really enjoy him and his podcast too.
He's brilliant.
Yeah.
He's brilliant. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wonderful.
Yeah. He sounds like C.S. Lewis. I've been to C.S. Lewis's grave, and I always picture C.S. Lewis sounding like N.T. Wright. So
Yeah, I totally get that.
I like that.
Yeah, I could totally get that.
Yeah, next time we ever have him speak, we should just have him make a statement. We'll record it and have him say, "Joy is the serious business of heaven."
Yes, yeah.
in his voice.
He's not a tame lion,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Where do we find you online, just so we can let everybody know?
So to lovehonorandvacuum.com is my blog, and I blog about sex pretty much every day, or marriage. I started off as more of a mommy blog, and then I gradually started more and more into sex, which is where I am now. And then I have the Bare Marriage podcast every Thursday, but you can get there from to lovehonorandvacuum.com too. All my books are there. I have my courses are there, including I have an orgasm course for couples where she's been having trouble reaching orgasm. I have a libido course, all kinds of fun things. Puberty course, how to talk to your kids about sex and puberty, we've got that as well.
That's important.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're so grateful to have had you on.
Yeah, Sheila, thank you so much.
Really good, and we can't recommend the book enough.
Well, thank you. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey guys, we're so glad that you are joining us for season 2 of Rethinking God with Tacos. You can find me, Derek Turner, at rivercharlotte.com. That's my church. And I'm on all the social medias as Pastor Derek T, D-E-R-E-K, Pastor Derek T.
Yeah, and he's a Twitter savant. You got to follow him on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter at Jason Clark is, and you can find all of these podcasts, including season 1, on all of the platforms. You can also go to afamilystory.org. And everything's there. If you sign up for our mailing list, we send out a weekly email that has articles, podcast information, and we also let you know about new books coming out or events that we're connected to. So like, share, retweet, and man, if you could write a review, it actually does something for the rankings. It makes
does,
it more available. So,
but a 5-star review, of course.
Yes.
If you can't write a 5-star review or something, just don't even write a review.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you can't say something nice,
don't say anything at all. I like that, and then apply that to this podcast. Definitely.
That's my motto. That's what I do.
I love it. So love you guys. Appreciate you coming on the ride with us.